right, hello everybody, and we have SIRDCAST number 4 with the incredible Dominick Cuccia, former Hellcat author, educator, great human being, performer at Disney World, band director. Let's see, roommate to Steve Fiddick, roommate to John Brennan, all these crazy great things. But Dom was a great teacher for me. He was an inspiration for my drumming as a kid in the Young Colonials, and so I just want to say, Dom, thank you so much for taking the time to chat this afternoon.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me. It's good to see you. It feels like forever with everything going on in the world. Seems like forever. It's nice to see you here.
Yeah, this is the new version of great to see you during COVID.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start just a few questions and we'll see where the conversation takes us. But quite honestly, whatever items you can share, whatever experiences that you can offer, this will be fantastic no matter what. So number one is just want to know, how did you get your start in drum corps?
Well, I love to share this story. Basically, it goes back to the bicentennial, the 1976. And I lived in Carmel, New York, and there was this parade going by our road. And it was like 100 degrees out. It was just miserably hot day, and these groups are going by. People are passing out, sweat's dripping off their face. Ambulance are picking up people from the side of the road. They just look miserable. And I thought to myself, that's what I want to do. And I that fall, Mr. Mooney's music class, fourth grade at Kent Elementary School, and he passed out these forms if you want to join the Young Colonials. So I went and signed up, to me, I wanted to march in parades, and fife and drum corps just coincidentally was the Young Colonials. It could have been a bagpipe group or a marching band or a drum and bugle corps. To me, it was just I wanted to march in that parade. I wanted to do that. And lucky for me, it was the Young Colonials because that was a great experience for me.
That's awesome. And I mean, during that time frame, it was a hotbed of activity for fifing and drumming, drum and bugle corps, and all that stuff. And so, I mean, you grew up in the Hudson Valley. I mean, how many corps would you say were kind of around in that area at that time?
It was crazy because if anybody goes to a fife and drum muster, and everyone loves the jam sessions. A lot of the firemen's parades in the Hudson Valley and in Putnam County, Westchester County, Dutchess County, really all over. Those firemen's parades afterwards, the jam session, it was kind of like being at a muster because there were so many corps, and corps that are most of them obviously aren't around now. Luckily enough, the Young Colonials are, but it was just incredible. I mean, yeah, off the top of my head, some of the corps that I loved, the Cornwall Continentals. That was Corps Harold Green led for many years, and Ricky and Jimmy McDonald were in the Continentals, and Vinny Seafield, Jerry Whitaker, and of course Kenny Green was in there, and Alan Allard. There were all these great drummers in the Continentals, and then the Continentals disappeared, and but then down south you had Pound Ridge Fife and Drum Corps. Was another corps. They had their own muster. And when you think about fife and drum musters, most of the time it's on a baseball field, and it's a hot, dry day, and you got that sand kicking all over. For the Pound Ridge muster, it was on a ball field, but the layout was beautiful. It was almost like a stadium effect because the hill went up like this to the sides, and as you were looking down, it was kind of like going to a drum and bugle corps show where you're in the stadium looking down at the corps, and you could see the drum line, you could see the whole corps. They had a great muster. Yeah, so many corps. The Bender Corps was around back then. Another great one. Yeah,
I love
it
it.
was awesome growing up in that time. And to be honest, I guess in a way I took it for granted because I was a kid. I thought that's the way it was supposed to be. I never imagined it would change over time, but it was incredible.
I mean, that's for me also thinking about that because you had so many great experiences with the Young Colonials growing up as a kid, and I know a couple cores really stuck out to you, especially OH Booth Hose, Dickerson, And those were some of those cores in that Hudson Valley that, you go, you finish the parade, there's the carnival at the end of the parade, you grab a hot dog and a beer, and Terrytown's in one corner playing a thing, and Dickerson's another corner playing a thing. And it's like this amazing concert of super local community music. And I remember as a young drummer going to those basically jam sessions / concerts at the end of the parades, and you knew every tune. Like if someone didn't know the tune, they're like, go look at Dominic. Dominic knows the tune. So like what how did that all come to be?
So as a kid, I didn't start out fast with drumming. See, with the Young Colonials, my first drum instructor was Gary Gelati from Vermont. And, he put sticks in my hand and, just got me holding up the sticks, going to break down the rudiments. I didn't know what a breakdown was. And you'd hit a couple beats. All right, beautiful. Come back the next week. So next week you come out, you get a little bit faster. All right, that's great. Come back next week. So what I thought when I joined was going to take a few weeks and I was going to be marching parades actually took a couple years. And before I actually made it into the drum line. And but once I got in, it's like I knew this is what I really wanted to do, and we would go to different musters or whatever, and I would buy the records and I would listen to one of the great ones was, it's not around now, hopefully someday someone will re-release it. It was called Pride and Joy. It was a 3-record set from the bicentennial.
Yeah, I remember getting that album, and I think it's in my parents' basement somewhere, but it was like, I think it was the bicentennial, and they just recorded cores, right?
Yeah. Oh, I could see his face in my mind right now. Phil Truitt was with the New Jersey Colonial Militia, and I think he might have been from Connecticut first and then moved to Jersey. But anyway, Phil Truitt apparently went around to every muster and parade and recorded all these cores, and it's just a beautiful thing. That album had so many cores. I'm guessing it was in the neighborhood of 20 different cores, but you had a lot of them from right there in Connecticut. But you also had Bill Reamer's Independence Fife and Drum Corps was on that album. Also had the final recordings of the Connecticut Yanks from 1976. And so with that recording, you could hear them at a muster, you could hear them at a parade, and you could hear them at a contest. And, just incredible sounds, going back there. That's how I learned a lot of songs. But then going to musters and meeting Duke Terreri, Duke was one of those guys. I saw him, didn't know him, but he was just this kind old man, and just hanging out with him. And then over time I did get to know him, but picking up the company books and learning to read, going through the tunes and hearing tunes at musters and asking people what the names were. And I would go through the company book and just every tune, whether they played them at musters or not, it didn't matter. I knew those beats. So the one occasion where this one song that nobody ever plays was played, I was going to know that drum beat, So I just became, and in many ways still am, a drum nerd. I wanted, that's what I wanted to do as a kid. I wanted to play the drums. I wanted to go play with all these great people, in the Young Colonials, we had a lot of great drummers in there. I mentioned Gary being the drum instructor. And also Mary Comer, she married Paul Saunders. So Mary Saunders, she was another instructor of mine who had a big effect on the whole beauty of breaking down rudiments. And while I don't do it enough now, and I don't think it's done enough nowadays, back then I learned to appreciate it. I didn't appreciate it at first, but as I really was able to do it, pretty decent, that's. I just began to appreciate the art of breaking down rudiments, and I go all over the place here.
No, this is great. So, I mean, one of the things here I think that's really important is that when I started taking lessons with Nick, he immediately would talk about you, and he would always put me next to people, and he said, copy this person, copy this person. And I've always looked up to you as a big brother. And one of the things I thought was one of the coolest things to watch was your relationship with Dickerson. And so I would love to hear, how did that start?
That is a thing of beauty, in the most simplest forms of friendship through music, right? The Young Colonials borrowed the phrase from the Greater Danbury Area Association, and we use it all the time, friendship through music. And so I was a young teen, maybe 13 years old, maybe 12 years old, and the Germantown Ancients had this great jam session in the middle of February. There's nothing else going on, and I'm this little kid. They invited me to come out to it, and I'm drumming, and Sammy was standing next to me. I didn't know who he was, and I'm just playing, and I'm playing my tunes, whatever. And we stopped after a tune, and he says to me, says, "Hey, you play nice." I said, "Oh, thank you very much." He says, "I don't mean to tell you how to play, but," he says, "you might want to change your hand here." And he told me I did this weird thing where I put my middle finger on top of the stick instead of my pointer. And he just, this kind suggestion. And I try after that. I wanted to drum next to him for the rest of the night. He'd leave, he'd go get a drink or something. He came back in there. I found myself moving over there, drum next to Sammy, And after that, every fireman's parade, which is where we would see Dickerson the most, I'd look for Sammy, and Sammy was just taught me so much about drumming and about being a human being. And I don't know who exactly where you're from watching this podcast and everything, but if you don't know, Sammy is African American, and the group he was with, Dickerson, it's all made up of African Americans. And I feel like the way the world is right now, it's almost like that whole thing of friendship through music. That's the thing that I believe can bring people together. This love of music that Sammy had and this love of music that I had just brought this little kid to admire this man, both as a drummer and a person. And he would refer to me as his son. And all these years later, his son, Brian Booker, I had met him when we were kids, but he wasn't in the drum corps. And all of a sudden, when I met him, he brought us together. He said, "Brian, I want you to meet your brother." And he brought us together, and we're really like brothers. We have that love of each other, and everyone in the Dickerson Corps. Sammy was first, but there are so many other drummers through the years that I knew, and Dave Body and Cecil and Willie and I'm sorry, Mark. I'm just babbling on here, going
No,
on.
this is great. No, keep going.
But as a kid, because they were African American, you didn't see a kid like me, or even a teenager like me, or a 20-something or 30-something. You didn't see us playing with them because I didn't expect it. But then they came to one of our Young Colonial musters, and they invited me to come on and play with them. One of the first musters we had, and it was just like a dream come true. And then through the years, the opportunities were, back then it was Sammy, but now unfortunately Sammy's gone, and so many of the legendary drummers are gone. But there are younger legends in the Corps, and David Nelson. We kind of grew up together, and now how many opportunities David has said to me, "Come up and play." And I'll share one last moment of this. So 1 year ago, Dickerson was their history is being celebrated in New Rochelle at the New Rochelle Library. They had a big display, and they had a concert. And after the concert, Dickerson came out to play in the library, and the crowd followed out. And Big Ronnie Allen, was out there playing with them. And so they're all playing through their music, and Ronnie sat down, and I sat on the floor right in the front so I could watch the drum line, see the drum line up close and everything, because I'm still a kid like that. I want to be near, I want to hear it. So then I see Ronnie motioning me, and he's calling me over. So I walked over. He had sat down on the edge, and he says, "Here, take my drum, you play." And I said, "No, Ronnie, that's okay. It's the Corps playing." And he said, "No, you belong out there." And he gave me his drum and gave me the opportunity to play with Dickerson one more time. And unfortunately, that's the last time I saw Ronnie. That's a great memory. and
Yeah.
he wasn't much older than me, and again, someone that you grew up with, and you grew up that he was like family,
Yeah.
so
I mean,
very lucky.
I think a lot of people take that for granted today because, a lot of folks are looking for reasons to divide themselves or separate themselves. And I mean, human beings, human nature, we don't really actually operate that way. We want to find connection. We want to find camaraderie. We want to be a part of something collaborative together. And I think what a lot of people, if you do your, obviously your history on the Dickerson, the Charles W. Dickerson Corps, you have to start thinking about Gus Moeller, right? Gus Moeller is the teacher of this corps and all of that. And so the story of this organization and how I almost feel like the level of class that drum corps brought to the fife and drum community elevated everyone that was interacting with them. The old guard did a performance at the Westbrook Muster quite a few years ago. It could be 10 years ago now, but it was one of the last times they try to field like a full core of the core out there. And so I think they ended up having 4 or 5 snare drums, 2 or 3 bass drums, 3 or 4 buglers, like 5 or 6 fifes. And I remember your family went out and joined them for a couple charts. And I always thought that was really cool. But what took me really back was after everyone had finished the day, one of the buglers stopped me, and I was wearing my old guard polo in the parking lot, and he was former Air Force, and he was retired Air Force, and he just stopped me and just said, "Thank you for keeping this rudimental drumming tradition alive in our military and keeping it relevant to the next generation." And to hear that, and it's the same exact things that a lot of us across the world are talking about. I mean, it's deeply rooted inside of almost every nation's psyche to have this music, this heritage, this cultural music be a part of the fabric of every country. And so like that's one of the most beautiful things I think about the Society of International Rudimental Drummers, the Bottom of the Glass podcast, all of these different groups that we're getting together now, and we're going, how do we come out of COVID and keep this fabric still stitched during a time that the world is kind of plunged into chaos. So I really think that's incredible, and quite frankly, I don't know a better way to do it than bringing people together through music.
Absolutely. And you look around when we go to PASIC. I go to the musters, and we have these relationships. And but you go to PASIC, I mean, there are so many people that we've developed friendships with across the country. People who love our tradition of fife and drum. And when we did PASIC 2008. And then we invited all these people to come up and join us on stage. And I remember one of the guys. See, I can't remember names, so I better not try and read. But so we invited all these people. I think there were 20 or 25 of us on stage just to play "Downfall of Paris," simple drum beat for us that we take for granted playing it at a muster, but for them to be on stage and actually playing on a rope drum and actually perform is a beautiful thing. And as after the clinic was over and going through the convention hall, I remember Garwood Whaley mentioning, "Oh, I heard all these people said it was so awesome to be on stage playing Downfall, the innovative percussion booth. Oh, I can't believe Cooperman, right? Oh, everyone was thanking us for letting us use their drums because we would go and we raid their booth, and if they had a drum there, someone was playing on it, So, um, so
No, that's awesome. So, I mean, to go back to your childhood again and to go from a different avenue, I think people also think I'm crazy. Like, I love marching parades. Parades to me were fun. You're like, you like marching parades is crazy. But competition, when you were growing up was also pretty fierce from what I recall. Is that an accurate statement?
well, if you ask the people who were competing 20 years before us, well, what we did was nothing. But um, uh, yeah,
I
I
have a
loved.
familiar story with that too. Yeah.
um, I loved competition. I know a lot of people said, "Oh, there's no friendship in competition." I don't know. I had so many friends You go to a muster is so big. The competitions were decent size and everything, but you actually had, at least my experience, you had opportunity to meet a lot more people afterwards, and competition for me. I'm going to jump. I don't know where our conversation is going to go, so I'm just going to take it and I'm going to put the ball. I'm going to tuck the ball. I'm going to run with it. So for me, right? So I'm growing up, and I thought I was a good drummer, and I was a little bit too egotistical and too. I thought I was better than I was, to put it bluntly. And like when I was a young to middle teenager and everything. And I thought, I'm one of the best around and everything. So I go to the Westbrook muster, and I see this guy playing on the drum pads at the Cooperman booth. And I'm like blown away by this guy. He was so freaking good, right? And then we go, I don't think they played on stand. And I was young. I didn't know a lot of people. But we're going to the different musters, and I see this guy. And I really got humbled because he was so good. But I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but he looks arrogant too, right? He may be a good drummer, but I judged him just by looking at him. And then I met him, and he was like one of the nicest guys in the world. It's Javier Morales. And for someone to be as good as he was and to be as nice as he was, I was just blown away. And competing wise, Javier had won the Northeasterns, but now I was nothing near what he was as a drummer. But that was all of a sudden became my goal. I wanted to play like Javier. I wanted to be good like Javier. He was my challenge. He was on the pedestal, and I wanted to be able to somehow approach that pedestal. And so much of what I've done with drumming, it really starts with Javier, where I thought I was good, but I didn't know. With all I could play, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right.
And seeing him play, and he knew, talk about knowing every tune. At that point, he knew every tune, and every medley, that every core, Javier was the guy in my mind. And so competition wise, all of a sudden I was competing against him. And it brought me to another level, because that was how good I dreamed of getting.
Right.
And especially after meeting him, it wasn't that he was an arrogant guy. It wasn't that he was a great guy and we would share different thoughts about drumming. And maybe we'll talk later about the Corey was in the Yankee Tunesmiths. That's a whole nother story. But
That court was lights out.
yeah. Well, I'll keep talking about competition real quick. So for me personally, competition, even as I got older, I enjoyed it as an individual. I enjoyed it as a full core thing, and it helped me grow as a drummer. And with the Young Colonials, and then with the Civil War Troopers, and then I was teaching the Regulators, and through the years, it was like competition was it really was something that helped us elevate our game. And when you looked at it, Westbrook muster was in August, the Northeastern Championships were in September. It was almost like you took that leap from Westbrook, which was the highest point of your season because it was the last big muster of the season, and now your focus was on that competition a month later or 3 weeks later. And it was just, the timing to me was beautiful. And I always looked forward to competition, and we won some, but we lost a lot too. But that's just the way it goes. And I never regretted being in competition as a kid.
I think it's very interesting because I was listening to another podcast, and it was discussing the idea of not just innovation, because I know we're in a traditional art form and we're talking about, traditional drumming, but innovation's always a part of it. But innovation also requires quality to elevate. And this discussion of innovating the level of quality, that they bring up this concept of the adjacent space. So the competitive adjacent space, meaning when Alexander Graham Bell was creating the light bulb, you had Tesla, and it was these two that were competing back and forth, but the quality ended up getting better and better and better. And so by the time the final product was out there, because these two competitors were finding the next step based on the prior research of the other person, the human race got better. And
Mm.
so when I think of competition and I think of music competition, when you go to the physical event, you may hear somebody playing something you've never heard before, and it just goes, "Wow!" Like like what you talked about with Javier. And I mean, I remember going to my first Northeastern, and I remember getting on the bus. We were going down to New Jersey, and I remember watching the Deep River Juniors warming up, playing this hybrid of drums and guns and thunder and lightning. And it was Aaron Baird and Tom Grote and Jamie Chapman and those guys. And it was like, these guys were monsters. And I was mortified. I was so nervous because these guys were so good. And it made me realize at that point, if I had not seen that, I would never have been given the chance to put myself out there to see if I could stand up to something of that quality. So I definitely know that with fife and drum not having competitions, I know a lot of people have different feelings about it in the United States, but the proof is in the pudding when you go overseas and you see the Swiss community and you see the Dutch community. Like these are traditional music communities that use competition for the greater good of the quality control of their art form. And so I think when we bring these things up, obviously the way to do the competition has to evolve. The way to do the judging and the grading and all the feedback, of course, that's got to evolve. And I think that was probably part of the problem on why it doesn't exist now. But I think you have some great educators that are now firmly inside of fifing and drumming, and there's active conversations about this idea of bringing a competition back to fife and drum and doing it really the right, quote unquote right way, if there is one, but allowing it to be a 21st century version of it than something that's kind of a throwback from the 1950s.
Well, I have a weird take on competition happening today in the fife and drum world. And basically, one of the reasons I think it kind of died out is there were less corps competing. There were less corps around, so less corps competing, and you had the same. It's it just when we competed, we were competing against more corps at every contest. And when you finally got to the Northeastern, you had this assortment of winners of each contest getting there. But when you get to a contest and it's only two corps, it's kind of like first place and last place.
Right.
And well, I don't have a problem losing to someone who's great, but I feel like it is kind of tough when you go to a contest and there aren't a lot of corps. So part of it, I think, this is weird because I can't step up and do the job, but I feel like part of it is the responsibility of the fife and drum community that we all love what we're doing. How do we get other communities? I'm not talking about I'm talking about towns. I'm talking about counties or whatever to support the activity. To get people like ourselves to commit to going and teaching a corps. That's another problem that a lot of corps have is actually finding an instructor who will commit to being there every Friday night or every Monday night. So
Right.
that's part of the challenge. I think we need to build up the whole activity in order to build up the competitive activity.
Well, and you
Um,
just bridged into a great next question too about teaching, because obviously I know you're a consummate teacher, you're a music educator, you believe in your heart what education can do for people. And so how did that start in your story with teaching and fifing and drumming?
um, Well, basically, I loved the Young Colonials, and I loved being in the Young Colonials. Everything I got from Gary and Mary, and then the other drum instructors who were in the corps or teaching the corps along the way. There was Jennifer Goujon and see, that's what happens. You start naming names, you leave people out. Karen Muldoon and Paul Moskowitz. They were also instructors with the corps through the years. But Gary and Mary were the ones who really helped me move forward. Teaching wise, so my dad, we had met friendship through music, right?
Mhm.
Jamming at one of the firemen's parades. We met the OH Booth Hose Fife and Drum Corps, and these were all old timers. I was a kid, right? Those old timers were younger than I am now, so it's funny how life rolls like that. So I started jamming with them, and they played more of a modern fife and drum style of music. And through them, my dad met the corps and ended up joining. And then for 2 years, I took 2 years off with the Young Colonials and played with O.H. Booth Hose. During that time, the Young Colonials, back then we had so many kids in the course, so many beginners. The drum instructor, the head drum instructor, couldn't teach them all. So he got me, this 13-year-old, to come in and start doing lessons. So Paul Moskowitz was the guy. He brought me in, and it was one of the greatest things. He gave me that opportunity, and the Young Colonials gave me that opportunity to start teaching. And as time went on, of course I ended up coming back to the Young Colonials, and after a couple of years, and that's when the whole competitive thing really got going. But then Paul wasn't the instructor anymore. Now I just kind of evolved into the drum instructor for the corps, and I brought a lot of ideas that I had, just had ideas I had through the years, and just brought them to the corps, and we moved in a new direction from what it was when I joined. But that's really where I got my teaching, my start to teaching was from Paul and the Young Colonials giving me the opportunity to teach beginners.
Fantastic.
Are you also a brass player too, Dominic?
Well, brass playing, that goes back to high school. When I was growing up, I joined the Young Colonials in 1976, but as I moved forward with that, in school, I actually played trumpet. So I played trumpet all the way through high school, from fourth grade on through 12th grade. And I played rudimental drumming in the Young Colonials in the fife and drum corps. So when I was a junior in high school, and I was thinking about going to school for music, I asked my band director, Sam Ralabate. He was a former Hellcat. He was a brass player and everything. And I said to him, I'm thinking about going to school, studying music. Could you help point me in a direction? And he said, well, I'll be very honest with you. You're a pretty shitty trumpet player. You really should go for percussion. And he did not say that in a mean way. It was a very, it was a nice way. And I knew that was my love, was playing drums. And, I would be studying percussion. So I went to college, and, all those years of playing brass didn't hurt me, because, you still needed a minor instrument. So, I majored in percussion and minored on trumpet. And that after that, when I moved on, I didn't use it for a lot of years, but teaching teaching third grade through eighth grade band, I'm teaching woodwind, brass, percussion, even strings. And I carry the trumpet with me to every lesson, and play along with the kids, or playing through an example on the trumpet. So it's something I did in fourth grade, and all the way, and it's all these years later, it's come back to really help in my teaching at school.
Mm-hmm. But I'm sure this influenced yourself as well in your composing, correct? So how did you blend traditional and not so traditional elements in your writing then?
Well, with composing and everything, when I first started out, I really, my whole thing was, I was hearing what other drummers were doing. I was very much into the music of Les Parks and the Sons of Liberty, but then I also had this sound of the Connecticut Yanks in my brain. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I was being exposed to the Bethpage Colonials. Bob Culkin had a totally unique take on rudimental drumming, and then I had Charles W. Dickerson with that Moeller influence. So I had all these different things coming into my, in my head, mixed up in my head. And when I first started writing, it was like a blend of all of these things. And I can't say it was actually cohesive. As I got a little bit older, I started studying music in school. I really got a better feel of how to put a solo together. And, listening to other drummers' solos, it was a big influence, was Mitch Markovich.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was a fife and drum guy. I didn't know anything about Mitch Markovich, and I was taking private lessons with a guy named Jeff Fennell from Poquag, New York, and he turned me on to Mitch Markovich, and it was a totally new a totally new voice that I had to listen to in this whole transition from traditional to not so traditional. And I've had people ask me, well, what exactly is not so traditional? And for
Exactly.
me, I kind of think of it as it's a style of rudimental drumming where you can use the traditional rudiments like 7-stroke roll, ratamacute, flamacute, drag paradiddles, rudiments that you won't hear in a lot of contemporary drumming, but now you kind of bring them together. You find a way to make them work together, kind of like, people walking hand in hand, taking styles of music and making them work hand in hand, So, and then, that beyond that, I've taken a lot of ideas from jazz. I was able to take a couple of lessons with Joe Morello, and just listening to the Dave Brubeck Quartet. Joe Morello was a great influence, and in college I had a couple of great drummers that I best friends with, Steve Fiddick, jazz drummer, and Steve Pramatic, and with the two of them, they influenced a lot of the newer, not so traditional ideas that became part of my my thought process and my creative process.
Mm-hmm. But how that's very interesting. So how do you how do you see at the moment the contemporary compositions and so on? What you see from with your musical background and your long background since 30 to 40 years. If you look at where we are going to and with all these elements you just mentioned, how do you, let's say, I wouldn't say judge, but see the compositions we have today, this contemporary rudimental drumming, and embedded in let's say these styles of jazz, of music, of different elements. How would you describe that, or how do you feel it?
I'll be honest. I think bringing those elements together is a lot easier now, and because drummers are exposed, the internet, there's a lot of downsides to it. But the positive thing about it is you're able to see drummers that you've never seen before. You're able to see styles of drumming that you've never seen. You may not be able to hear it in person, but you
No.
go on the internet, and all of a sudden you could hear just about anything you want. And bringing those sounds into people's mind, whether they come from a fife and drum background, a pipe band background, a drum and bugle corps background, whatever, wherever you come from, whatever corner of the world, you have all these different things that you're listening to. They're becoming part of your drumming vocabulary. You may not say it the same way as someone from another country, but musically, now all of a sudden you could speak that sound with your sticks. And when you take a pen to the paper or fingers to the computer keypad, whatever, and you're creating your music, all of a sudden we're all speaking the same language of music. So now, Mark writes a solo, and he's incorporating different Swiss ideas with fife and drum ideas and sounds he's heard in Holland or South America, wherever. All of a sudden, Mark takes a solo. He can incorporate all these ideas, and it doesn't sound like 4 separate ideas. He's able to weave them together because now we're able to hear them. They become second nature to us. And, and I feel like for myself, just being able to go on YouTube and listen to, I'll tell you a real quick one. A few months ago, B. Michael Williams was a hand drummer and everything, and I had met him a number of times. Unfortunately, I knew of him, and he wrote me after some PASIC performances. He sent me some nice messages congratulating me on a great clinic and how much he loved it and everything. But we didn't have a tight friendship. So a few months ago, I found out of the blue that he had passed away, and he had passed away 3 months earlier. And I just sat down that night and I wrote something called Song for B. Michael Williams.
Right.
And it wasn't that it sounded like his drumming, but it was from listening to him playing that, whatever notes came out of my mind, were inspired by him, you know,
Mhm.
and you know, some of it is or I shouldn't say some of it, so much of it is the videos that we're able to see now of other people, including someone like B. Michael Williams, who really is so close because he was in North Carolina, you know. But inspiration comes from all over. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But that brings me to the next question. I think. Do you have a short list of those who have left the biggest impact of your life on your life?
you mean like rudimental drummers who've had that kind of impact?
You're completely open, Dominic. I think I'm sure, as you just mentioned, it goes hand in hand with other influenced pieces.
Okay.
So
Well, definitely, you know, Nick Attanasio was, you know, here's a funny thing I say about Nick Attanasio. I spent 30 years drumming with Nick Attanasio. That was only 1/3 of his life.
mhm.
So those other 60 years, I cannot imagine what it would have been like. But he kind of shared so much of what he did for the first 30 years of his life with the Sons of Liberty and with the KFC. And then when he moved on with the different corps through the years. And you know, these last 30 years, I got to feel part of you know, part of his history, part of the Sons of Liberty history, part of the Ken Lemley and who was one of the earliest Sons of Liberty, and then Bobby Thompson and Les Parks, all the others. And I was able to experience a little bit of them through Nick Attanasio. And, you know, so Nick was an incredible influence on me. And, you know, one of the greatest people I've known in my entire life. Then also, you know, we were talking earlier about Duke Terreri,
Yeah.
and Duke Terreri, you know, he on a different level. Duke, he was someone when they were creating the Company of Fifers and Drummers books back in the 60s and 70s, collecting music. The legend is Duke would drive from New Jersey, drive to Connecticut, sit down with Connecticut different drummers who didn't read music. They all could play, but they didn't read regular drum music. They read a code or something. And Duke would sit down and transcribe their drum parts. And someone like Duke, who was willing to take his free time to go help promote someone else's music for this art form that we all love, you know, that was something that you know really has inspired me and still inspires me today. You know, Duke Terreri.
Mhm.
Um, when you look at different drummers of different styles, you know, a drummer that I've always enjoyed is Danny Raymond Jr. And he's down at Disney. And when I was at Disney, I met him, but I didn't really know him. Ironically, through the computer, you know, through email, whatever, we had some interaction through the years and everything. And you know, Danny Raymond Jr. is a drummer that I've totally enjoyed listening to, watching some of the videos, and you know, love Danny Raymond, and he, although he's would be considered a more contemporary drummer, I really feel like he brings elements of traditional drumming into his music. Um,
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I remember watching Danny Raymond with the Jameters,
yeah,
and he would do all this stuff with rudimental drumming on trash cans and everything else. But I mean, he was a Jersey guy, right? And his father was in drum corps, and they were all a part of that old New Jersey kind of VFW American Legion scene. And that was a hotbed too when it came to those competitions, because you had these fife and drum guys like take a Les Parks who goes to Juilliard. He graduates from Juilliard in 1950. He takes this classical education, goes back to fife and drum. Him and Bill Krug start putting together these incredible medleys of music. But really, you have all of this being that innovation piece between education, competition, learning how to build the craft using other skill sets and other knowledge to make the community stronger. And I mean, that's one of the things I feel like we're doing now with a lot of these associations, is taking lessons learned from multiple places and not closing the doors or living kind of in a vacuum or in a bubble, saying no, this is only fife and drum, you know, we don't need to know anything from DCI. Okay, this is only DCI. We don't need to learn anything from these Swiss drummers. Okay, it's pipe band. We don't need to learn. And you can feel it right now that You know, there are definitely some folks that are nervous about losing the roots of the tradition, but I do believe there are enough advocates out there that recognize that the roots of the tradition, the foundations of the tradition, are so incredibly important, and no one's trying to actually get rid of any of that. There are some people that will stick with the most traditional foundations that you can ever find, and those people are great, and they're there and they're doing it. But you have to recognize the other side of it to keep the thing alive, to keep it healthy. You have to find that adjacent space and keep this thing continuously rolling, like you talked about earlier with Javier.
Mhm. And what I like very much, Dominic, and maybe that's also for me really important is if you look at your work and your let's say what is at the end really left, or what, let's say, your heritage, or how you say your work you did or you still do. I think it is really a very, for me as a someone from the outside, really impressive to see how you were authentic to what you did, but keep that the essence of your compositions and your work. I think is very strongly, like you mentioned before, is this authentic root in traditional rudimental drumming, where you learned, and you said, with Nick Attanasio and so on. But on the other one, translated in a way that is quite, for me, musical. You know what I mean? So it's quite, it has something in where you say it's not just these things what you expect. It's much more also tweaked in some certain variation, what are quite musical. And I think that's I'm not quite sure how you see that, but for me, when I look at your work, it is really something who has inspired by music, about your teaching, about your work, and how you translate it to also maybe a younger generation. But I don't know how you see that. But for me, it was very impressive to see how you play with this, let's say, things what you just said, inspired by Nick and the other ones, but how you translate it into the next level, and how you play that. But I don't know how you see that. But I mean, you can't say that the way maybe, but that's really something what is curious for me, for my side.
Yeah, well, you know, the way I see it is we have the Company of Fifers and Drummers books, for instance, that have all the, you know, more of the traditional drum beats that we all play. So when we go to a muster, you know, we have a basis that fife and drum corps, we can play this music together. And then through the years, some of the corps, like the Sons of Liberty, the Connecticut Yanks, the New York Regimentals, some of their music has kind of risen where it's incorporated into our fife and drum repertoire. But it doesn't end there, because one time at PASIC, I think it was Omar Hakim was doing a clinic, and he had a guitar player there, and the guitar player steps up and he says, "I just wanted to say something." He says, "We don't have anything like this for guitar players." He says, "This is one of the coolest things. You drummers are so lucky." And, you know, but I noticed that within all aspects of music, because just like, I'll give Mark the credit here, Mark, this whole pad jam at PASIC, right, where you get all these drummers together, and we just start drumming. You know, you probably wouldn't find at the tuba convention a bunch of tubas sitting out in the lobby playing their music together, or you know, the flute players convention. And it's not a knock on any other instrument, but our instrument allows us to walk off that muster field, to leave that tattoo, to leave, you know, that drum corps competition, and get together and just all of a sudden get in the lobby of a hotel and just start playing this other music that has evolved from our traditions. So so I mean, I enjoy as much as anybody playing a drum beat like Connecticut Halftime and Burnsmore 6/8. But as we move on, we get to these other events. I like the idea of playing a little bit more contemporary rudimental drumming that mixes in some of the ideas that are, you know, from Switzerland, from the United States, from Argentina, from wherever. You bring these ideas together, and jazz elements, and some people incorporating a little bit of something that might be considered more classical in the style of the way they write or the way they interpret the music that they're writing. And so I like that future of rudimental drumming, where we don't forget the past by any means, but we keep evolving, and just by sharing what each of us has, we're able to create something, the next thing, so.
That's great, Dominic. So that sounds to me, Mark, so he's an ideal candidate for SIRD and movement, isn't it?
Exactly. It's Dominic and I always are struggling with the same thing, and that thing is called time.
No, but I think you mentioned it actually, Dominic. It's something what is unique for the drummers is community. Let's say building the community, building the shaping. It's not that you as a musician is in front. It's the community in front. It's the teamwork. It's the elements. It's the letting something build up without bringing yourself too much in front. I think that's it's a very democratic thing to do, or let's say a very social maybe part how our instrument is led, even when it's that dominant and also nominated by people. I mean, we have to see that, but I think it's a people thing. So I like that very much, like you just mentioned. And what I also like is how you define what you did and what you said. But that brings me to my next question is how do you see now actually the situation in the US, but also globally? I mean, you said, yeah, it's nice. I mean, you're privileged, definitely. you had your background. You were privileged to see what you did and what you made. But how do you see 2021? I mean, in this at the moment, the situation.
Well, it's tough because I think everyone is just dying to get back out there and play.
Yeah.
And live music. I had an opportunity over 2020 to go out and see a few people play live, socially distanced and everything. Ironically, rudimentally, I didn't do anything in 2020, but I played drum set with my daughter's little ensemble. And trust me, I'm not any great drum set player, but I had the opportunity to go out and do that.
Opportunity, yeah.
But it was fun, and I was just dying to get out there and play. So I think with 2021, it may take a little bit for people. Some people are going to feel comfortable and ready to just jump right into it. And other people are going to want to keep their distance. Some people want to, maybe dip their toes in the water before they go out to these events. But I think we're going to start coming back and going to be coming back strong, because so many of us are just, we feel deprived. It's a year of our life taken away. Having said that, I think the problem is going to be some of the we haven't been able to teach the way we wanted to. There's not obviously you teach online and everything. If you're farther apart, that's one thing. But for a fife and drum corps and all the groups that would rehearse weekly and now haven't been able to rehearse, I think that's where we're going to find the challenges. The young colonials, the one I grew up with, the one my kids are in, they haven't had a rehearsal in over a year now. And some, they've tried to have some online events, and but I think for them, the kids who were new in the corps, you know what I'm saying? They're the ones that are going to be tougher to get back in. So the new people into our activities, I think that's going to be the challenge. I think the people who love the activity to begin with, I think we're all going to be ready to move forward and get out our sticks and start playing in some capacity, or should I say any capacity that allows,
So you mean that this summer there will be any muster at all? How do you see that?
Well, I think it's going to be a wait and see kind of thing. Like the young colonials, they always have their muster the third Saturday of August. Mm-hmm. And right now they're planning on having it. The location where they have it, they got in touch with the drum corps and said, let's firm up the date right now because we're optimistic that we're going to be able to have this event. And so we're planning on it. Everything's moving forward. Other musters are probably doing the same thing, but it's not going to be left up to the drum corps. It's not going to be left up to the musicians who decide if we can do this. It's really going to be left up to the local, the towns, you know?
Yeah, of course.
They're going to allow you. So there was one in Massachusetts that just got canceled. I think it was for April or May. So then the next one's up on the block in June and July. I think as we get closer, we'll see if they're able to have theirs. Then I don't see why we can't just keep continuing, you know. But if
I think especially for the young drummers and fifers, I think now I see that here in Switzerland. I mean, we have already over a year, let's say 2 years, where they're not able to show what they do, and I think that's a huge challenge because it's essential. You know, these 7 years, I would say, the 7 years of a youngster life, and if you have 2 years of them, you can't show. I think has a big impact because we live with rehearsing, and not only rehearsing, also to show what we're doing and events.
Sure.
Yeah. And I'm sure you have the same issue there. And I hope really that in summer we can open up and go back to normal, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So to pivot to a lighter note, we're going to hop into this fire round, or a so-called fire round. We'll see how much of a fire round or lightning round this turns into. But this is a series of questions that we'd like to end with. We're going to have 3 questions. Do your best to answer them how you can. But let's start off with, do you have a favorite drum solo?
Yeah, fire round. Huh. If you can't tell, I talk a lot. So I'll do my best to answer that. I've already talked more than I should have, right? Just by explaining how I'm not going to be able to talk short. So basically, favorite drum solo. See, I have to put them in categories. My favorite traditional rudimental snare drum solo is the Cormier 2/4. I think that kind of set the standard for which drum solos were written. Definitely influenced me. When I look at contemporary, you know, I mentioned Danny Raymond Jr. before. I love his drum solo Skyliner, and you know, he played that, won competitions with it and everything. It may be 20 or so years old, but to me, it's contemporary. I think that's a beautiful solo. Favorite drum solo that I wrote that I've heard played was is Rice Pudding. Right, we played that with the Young Colonials, and then luckily the year before this whole COVID thing, my kids, my nephews and nieces, all Jeff Prospery Jr., Jason Molly, and John Paul, Matthew, Miles, Dominic, they all got to play this solo. I was actually able to see them play it on the field. It was incredible. One of the greatest moments of hearing something I wrote played. Last but not least, my favorite drum solo moment I ever saw. Right now, the old guards played lots of great solos through the years, incredible solos. Right, and I know I don't mean to offend everyone who thinks Joe 90 is the best drum solo on the planet, but my favorite solo that the old guard ever played, one of the greatest performances I ever heard, was North of the Border. I believe it was 1988. It might have been 87, but I think it was 88. And the drum line, the snare line, was Brian Pentney, Robbie Graves, Ross Andrews, and BJ McAllister. That right there, both the solo and the performance, was one of the greatest moments I've ever had of listening to a rudimental drum line. And I just think that solo is incredible.
If anyone has any questions about that, you need to look up all of those pieces, because right there, that is like rudimental gold. Yeah. All right, so if you're a rudimental drummer, go hunt down those pieces or those recordings, because you will not be disappointed. Yeah, and that drum line, that was the old guard snare line right there. I mean, that line was incredible. I remember that. They left a huge impression on me. And if you don't know Rice Pudding at all, there's this really famous lick in there.
Why we are not surprised?
It's one of the most famous licks you'll hear all throughout Europe by some crazy drum corps called the Top Secret Drum Corps. And Dominick Cuccia wrote that section of it, and it was definitely borrowed quite a few times. All right.
Dominic. So, but
Next one.
that brings me to my fire. So what is your favorite drum corps or ensemble that you never played in?
Okay, so
And you can be honest. Now you can be honest.
So I mentioned earlier a drummer named Javier Morales, right?
Yeah.
And Javier played in the Yankee Toonsmiths. That drum line had Javier Morales, Jason's Mains, Tommy Kaburis, Kenny Hagel, and it was an incredible drum line. The Yankee Toonsmiths are the core where I have not found any videos of them, but if someone has them, they should post them because that was a hot drum line. I wish I had had the opportunity. I played with them twice, once at a muster and once at a muster parade. But that is the drum line that's lost in time that everybody should have seen play back around like 83, 84, 85. Incredible drum line. The core that everyone knows, see, Mark thought this was a great question because we'll just throw that softball up there and Dominic will knock it out of the park, right? Anyone who knows me knows that my favorite core of all time is the Connecticut Blues, right? First time I heard them play, I fell in love with the core. The fife repertoire, so much of it written by John Benoit, and it's perfect. Everything about it from the first time I heard them, and then the drum stuff, early stuff like Country Dance was like some of the guys in the drum line wrote it. John Ressler, Mike Severino, Steve Varhall. I think there was another drummer credited on that. Great piece of music, and that was early. And then Paul Cormier came in, and Paul Cormier was writing for them, wrote Outlaws, and after that it was Danny Mullen, and another one of those great drummers that not enough people know of, Danny Mullen, and he wrote Aaron Boat and some other music. That to me, that core had the perfect repertoire, and the uniforms. Incredible uniforms, and then everything about the Connecticut Blues I've been in love with them ever since I was a kid. Some people are Yankee fans, some people are Cowboy fans. I'm a Connecticut Blues fan.
I love it, and I think that's a great way to round the bend with this podcast because I think Dominic, you have the heart and the passion of a young teenager, my friend, a young teenager. And honestly, what I love about it is it's inspiring just to chat with you about, your upbringing, how the drum corps scene used to be, where it is now, where we see it in the future. And quite honestly, I mean, it's inspiring to look at how rudimental drumming, community music, it brings people together and it fixes a lot of the world's problems. And we could not need it more now than ever before. So I just really want to say thank you so much, my friend, for sharing these incredible stories.
Oh, happy to do it, man. Friendship through music, man. If the world could live by that, boy, the world would be a better place.
Amen.
I hope we really, amen, and I hope we will have the opportunity to play it all together live, because that will be a big privilege also from my side.
Awesome. Dominic, thank you so much for all your time.
Sure thing. Thanks so much for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dominic.
All righty.